Tick, tick.
Are we waiting for the video to...
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Rye Town Council meeting of July 17th, 2018. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. Heavenly Father, bless this assemblage. Grant us the wisdom to make our every decision fair-minded and in the best interest for all its residents. Amen.
Hope, please call the roll.
Councilperson Lindsay Jackson.
Here.
Councilperson Thomas Nardi.
Here.
Councilperson Jill Axelrod.
Here.
Councilperson Anthony Baxter.
Here.
And Supervisor Gary Zuckerman.
Here. Our first item on the agenda tonight is a public hearing regarding the Community Development Block Grant Project at Crawford Park. May I have a motion and a second to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
The purpose of this hearing is it's one of the final steps that the state requires as part of its final audit of the Crawford Park handicap accessible improvements, is to have a public hearing regarding the completed project. So with that, I invite any members of the public who wish to speak on the project to come forward and speak.
Good evening, Supervisor Zuckerman and council members. My name is Mel Tansman. I'm the Executive Director of Westchester Disabled on the Move, and I've had the privilege to work with the town of Rye in pursuing the accessibility modifications that were made at Crawford Park. And I've said this before at other meetings, and I really give the town of Rye a lot of credit for taking the initiative without having an advocacy group push you to do it. We all want inclusive recreation in parks for all populations, regardless of their abilities, and I think it's great to have this public hearing. It's National Park and Recreation Month, July. And it's the fact that Rye, when they look at its parks, they want them to be used by all, regardless of whether they can walk, whether they are children who have differing abilities, who can use the same recreational equipment as every other child, and the wonderful sensory garden that was created. So I'm incredibly supportive of what the town has done, and I know you also have some wonderful plans for the future at Crawford Park, and it's been our honor to be a partner with the town of Rye in this effort. And I think that at some point I want to see if there is some kind of a national recognition award for towns and municipalities that just take these kind of initiatives to make sure their parks can be enjoyed by all. So basically, great job. I think I think the completion of the park has been a wonderful experience. I don't live in Rye, so I don't know the usage at this point. I'm hoping that as more and more people find out about the wonderful resource there, which for now includes the universal playground and the sensory garden, that people will come from all over to look at this as a model for how municipalities and towns should be providing recreation for its citizens. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mel. And as a matter of fact, we did get a letter from the Friends of Crawford Park, right, Debbie?
Yes, we did.
Who, which you please make part of the record. Where the Friends have noticed that there's continued and increased use of the playground, not from just the residents of the town of Rye, but from all over the county, because the reputation of that playground is getting around, and it's getting increased use. And Mel, I was just checking my calendar because you mentioned it's National Parks Month, and on Thursday, the 26th of July, Senator Shelley Mayer is having an ADA commemoration ceremony at Crawford Park.
Right, we're doing that in conjunction with Senator Mayer, and we do appreciate the town making its facilities available for that. And hopefully it'll be something that we can do on a yearly, annual basis to make people aware of what the Americans with Disabilities Act is, and more people with disabilities can participate at all levels of society, be it employment, recreation, education, whatever. And it's wonderful, once again, to have a partner like the town of Rye.
Thank you, Mel. Anybody else want to speak?
I'm gonna have a microphone here. Come here.
I think you need to glue down the rocks. You know the kids are gonna be throwing them at each other.
Well, we know that.
I thought I had the rocks removed.
Oh, you did? I drove through last week, you started on the Main Street.
Yeah.
Kids are gonna complain though. They're gonna throw it.
Would anybody else like to speak? Mr. Buzen, please introduce yourself, although we do know who you are.
Good evening, honorable members of the town council. Supervisor Zuckerman. I'm here tonight to speak on, in my position as chair of the rec council in the village of Rybrook, and I will echo the comments made by this gentleman about what a wonderful park it is. It is the go-to park for my 2-year-old granddaughter. I am a little embarrassed as a village official to say that I go to the Rye Town Park when I want to take her on the swings, but nonetheless, it's a great facility. It is incredibly well used, well designed. However, this is not a negative, but an addition. We in the village will be looking in over the next few months to the concept of possibly putting some kind of sun protection above the playgrounds in the village of Rybrook. You have a somewhat better situation in Crawford Park. There is a certain amount of certainly over the playground, a certain amount of tree coverage, but this all came actually as a result of a trip that my wife and I took 6 months ago to Israel, of all places. All of their public parks have some kind of coverage that acts as both a UV screen for the children, and frankly, because it gets hot there, to keep the children cooler. We are going to be looking into it in the village of Rybrook. It seems like, since Israel is somewhat of an incubator for interesting new concepts, it might be something that we might want to look into, especially given the fact that there's been more and more research about how being out in the sun, which we were all told when we were kids was really good and healthy for us, sometimes isn't really that great. So I think it's something you might want to look into. We'll certainly the research we will do, we'll share with the town, and hopefully it may lead to some kind of movement towards doing something of that nature. But otherwise, it's a great park, and congratulations to the town on really a great job. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Of course, Mr. Tansman alluded to the other work going on at Crawford Park, and the demolition is nearly complete on the interior of the mansion. We're hoping to get bids soon on the general construction, where we're going to be installing an elevator that will make the second floor fully accessible, together with emergency stairs and an emergency chair. Every bathroom will be universally accessible, and other improvements. We're also putting in a grant for Crawford Park. Debbie, with the you want to just touch base on what we're doing with the whiteboards, et cetera, and the sound system?
I think we discussed last month, we submitted grants through the Westchester Urban Consortium Community Development Block Grant Program for accessible modifications to Crawford Park. We put together a program, actually with the assistance of Mel Tansman, thank you very much, for a number of modifications. First, to the interior, we applied for a hearing assistance program, assistance programs for the hearing impaired, software, technology, voice to text technology, where we could show subtitles. Subtitles is the wrong word, but that's text, speech to text. Captions, thank you. There are a number of other hearing loops for hearing aids, ADA accessible bleachers for the sports fields outside, for a study to put in accessible pathways around the park, and accessible exercise stations, in the same way that we have a playground which has universal accessibility for typical children and children with disabilities to play together. We want to put in 4 stations around Crawford Park where adults with disabilities and typical adults can exercise.
Yes.
Together.
Can both exercise.
So that roughly covers our grant applications.
And that's just for Crawford Park, because Rytown Park, of which I'm the president of the Rytown Park Commission, has also put in applications to make the ramps handicap accessible, to make handicap accessible bathrooms in the bathhouse, et cetera. So we're committed as a town to make all of our facilities universally acceptable. Does anybody else wish to speak?
I just wanted to speak as well and thank all of my colleagues on the board, Supervisor Zuckerman, Debbie, you've been fantastic, and with everyone working together, I think we've sort of gotten every detail in this project. We even, I think a couple of meetings ago, discussed vending machines that were accessible to users of different abilities and things that you wouldn't think of and that you kind of take for granted. But I also, yeah. And I did want to thank Westchester Disabled on the Move, because you guys have been with us since day one and, have really guided us to where we are now and helped us through the process. And I am so excited for this project. I think it is groundbreaking. It's the first of its kind, but I hope that it brings about facilities like this in the future. And anything that we can do, I know anything I can personally do to help with Rytown Park and the accessibility there, the handicapped accessibility, I will be more than willing to help, because I think that the bathhouse and the beach is really something that we live near the water. We live near the beach. Everyone should be able to go there and enjoy it.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. With that, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The minutes of June 19th, 2008. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
I'll second.
Are there any comments, additions, corrections? If not, may I have all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. I just want to skip, I know Denisha's listed next, but Navy has been here since the last meeting. Navy, would you like to give your Town of Rye statement, please? And Dave, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Supervisor Zuckerman and council members. I'm Amy DeJonovic with Meyer Murky and Justic, and I will present to you the financial.
Speak into the mic.
Just bring it down a
Sure.
little bit.
Hold it down.
I will present the Town of Rye internal financial statements for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2018. They start on page 5 of your packet, titled The Statement of Revenue and Expenditures. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. So what you have here, I believe, is like a 21-page package, because what we do is we close the books for all of the departments. So we go through, we close the accounts, meaning we reconcile all of the bank accounts, all of the receivables, we book the accruals, tie out payroll, and then we look at budget to actual for each and every department. If anything has a variance, we look into the variance, book adjustments, and so forth. And if you look at, I believe it's in your packages, pages 2 and 3, the variance analysis will explain any fluctuations, budget to actual. And then the summary page, which is the 5th page, has 8 columns in there. The first column is the budget. This is summarized, the revenue and the appropriations for the year. The second column is the actual June 30th results. So we've got our revenue on the top, and then we've got the general fund appropriations at the bottom. And so as you can see, our revenue for the first 6 months was $1,135,000, and our expenditures or total appropriations was $1,004,000. So the net result was a deficit of $268,000. I'll pause there for a second. Any questions? No? Okay. So the third column compares that to where we would expect the percentage to budget to be. And the biggest impact is we're about 30% of budget in the revenue line. And the reason for that is most of that is timing. So a lot of our revenue comes in later in the year. So we've got things like the tax collection fees that comes in September. We've got the state aid grant that comes in October. And so what will happen in the second half of the year, we expect revenue to increase. And then we've got some in-rent properties. We haven't had any sales so far, and so we expect that to come in later in the year. And so the revenue in the second half of the year, the third and fourth quarter, should come up to budget. Okay? As relates to expenses, you'll see that in the second to last column on the right, the expenses are $269,000 behind. So we've gone through that, and so for the most part, we've gone through each and every department. We are trending on the expense side, on the OTPS, other than personnel costs, behind in almost all expense line items. So our salaries, benefits, and taxes, if you look at the detail, are pretty much exactly where we budgeted to be for the first 6 months. But on our expenses, we're behind when it comes to things like office supplies, repairs and maintenance. And again, a lot of that may resolve itself during the year, but through the first 6 months, we're behind. Just cost cutting, people being careful.
So we're behind but ahead.
Behind in expenses,
Yeah.
where we thought we would be for 6 months, yeah.
Define behind. You mean we're spending too much?
No, we're
spending too little.
less.
Less,
We're
that's what I
spending
thought, right.
less, behind, yes.
Yes,
We're
so
spending
we're-
less than expected for the first half of the year.
So we're better than we.
Better.
We're better.
We're
Okay.
better in
Let's.
expenses, yes.
How's our legal department line?
It's actually better.
How's our legal department line?
Our legal expenses are better than expected, meaning they're behind.
I mean, there's less expense as opposed to more expense.
Yes. It's one of the items that Debbie and I actually talked about and looked at on Thursday. Yes. Questions?
I guess we better spend more money, right, on legal?
No, we like not spending.
No, okay.
Well,
There's obviously a reason for that. Legal expenses go up and down
Yeah.
depending
Well,
on
we
with the
didn't have
cases
sales
that are
of the
coming in.
property yet, so there's a lot that's going to
Yeah.
happen. As I said, a lot of it's related. As we incur sales and as we have transactions, I'm sure some of the will incur additional costs.
And
Don't forget bills.
and maybe legal can kind of opine, but I was just wondering, are we likely to have some in-rem sales coming this year, or is it?
Well, we certainly hope so, because we've budgeted quite a bit of in-rem sales and related interest and penalties related to the sales.
Yes, we're hoping to have quite a few.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and that will increase our legal fees.
That's easy. We just won't pay the lawyers, that's all.
And then can I give a quick update on the audit?
Sure.
Yeah, so the audit is also almost done. The final audit documentation was provided to the auditors on Friday. And so we hope that by the next meeting, you should have at least draft audited financial statements.
Right. Great,
Okay?
great. Any questions? None? Thank you, Navy.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated.
I do want to thank the staff, though, as far as being behind with our supply budget and everything else. Thank you guys for being mindful and doing your best.
Yeah, Navy, next time, we're going to have to not use the word behind.
Yeah,
Behind is a negative
I
term.
know it.
Behind in revenue is bad, behind in expenses is good.
Ahead of the curve, but less expensive.
We don't want to hear the word ahead. Positive, let's have positive, positive.
But
Okay.
oftentimes it's our staff members working to save money that it really makes the difference.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's working at it. We're all cognizant of it. We're getting the budget numbers. People see what the budget numbers are, and they're aware of what the position should be. Our next item is a presentation. Denisha Williams, our Crawford Park signage concept. Welcome, Denisha.
Okay, see if this works. I'm pushing HDMI, it's supposed to work. Oh, it's sleeping. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much. So Supervisor Zuckerman and Council, it's a pleasure to be here again to speak with you tonight. Appreciate the invitation to come in to do a progress report on the signage plans for Crawford Park. So where we are, we're just going to do tonight just a brief kind of catch-up presentation to let you know what's happened so far and kind of where we're headed after this. So we have, with being here landscape architecture, we've met already with a committee of Supervisor Zuckerman, Councilman Nardi, Debbie Reisner, also Laura Klein of Friends of Crawford Park, and Gary Gianfrancesco with Arconics Architects to go over some concepts that we've put together. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Patrick Weisel, who's not here this evening, but Patrick is trained as a landscape architect, and he also has a previous career in graphic design and advertising. So you know, we especially looped Patrick in to be project manager on this particular project. So where we are now, we're in the concept phase of the project. Our main goal when we met already has been to to choose a color scheme and to choose typeface selections for the signage.
Excuse me, Denisha, let's just back up one reason. The question is, why are we doing this? We have obviously renovated pavilions, our new playground and sensory garden. The mansion is undergoing a major reconstruction, and the signs in the park are dated. They don't provide enough information or proper information. They're hard to see. And so we're undertaking a project to make the signage compatible with the updated park itself. And that's why Denisha is here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for context. And we would just say, I mean, we think it's a great move to do this as a overall messaging within the park. And as Gary said, it's definitely an aesthetic issue, but it's also, in many cases, a safety issue, and just overall will help the
I think
look and function.
Did you want to speak there?
Yeah, the signage, I mean, it's outdated.
Introduce yourself.
Ross Corey from Woodville. The bushes need to be cut back. Very dangerous. When somebody pulls in, somebody walks down the path at the entrance, you can't see them. And it goes all the way up the winding, right up to the mansion. Where the visibility is not good.
Could you be specific, when you pull in off of Bridge Street, is that what you're talking
Buffalo
about?
Lincoln. Am I right? I'm not a navigator here. No, Lincoln.
Ridge.
Ridge Street.
Yeah,
Ridge
Ridge
Street.
Street.
The curvy road. The curvy road.
Yeah, I'm not good with roads. You can't see anything. I mean, and it's winding. I'm not saying, saying that some of the bushes need to be removed or trimmed back to see the signage.
You're right.
Or no walking this way, or that way, because it's one way. I see people drive the wrong way.
Yes, we have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Those are excellent points in terms of context. Yes, definitely we are looking also at visibility of the signage and visibility for navigation as
Suppose
well.
a kid with autism gets away
Yeah.
and the car pulls in, it does say slow down on it, but if you can't see it, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And those kinds of specifics are so important for this, yeah.
Some sign, children at play or special needs.
Yeah,
children at
absolutely.
play.
Yeah, children at play are definitely, there's several locations where we're looking at those types of signs for certainly. So just kind of some general guidelines that we've looked at so far. As Patrick is fond of saying, the best sign is no sign. However, you really can't get by with that for reasons that we've already discussed. We don't want to overpower the landscape, but we do want to get noticed with the information that really needs to be communicated. We want to unify the property, as Supervisor Zuckerman was speaking about, and we also want to differentiate it as a municipal park, say differentiate it, for example, from state parks or other parks that might be around, and also emphasize the historic nature of the park. So we went through a whole exercise to look at what color would derive best from the park and would signify all those things that we have talked about. We did kind of a process of elimination, and the color that I think everyone agreed on, I think we had consensus that a slate gray that really coordinates with the roof of the mansion and several other features is something that's very intrinsic and tends to work well. It doesn't, it's not glaring in the landscape. It kind of does what we say, it lays down and behaves, but it also supports that messaging that we want to get across. We also went through an exercise about typeface selection. I think in the interest of time, because I know there are a lot of agenda items tonight, I won't go through all of the details, but we did consider a number of issues about typeface selection to make sure that whatever we chose would work well. And the typefaces that the committee recommends were, there's one sans serif and one serif font. So the sans serif fonts are on the left, serif fonts are on the right, and the one that was selected and is recommended, those two are outlined in red, and those two are Franklin Gothic, and then on the serif is the Gaudi Old Style. They're pretty straightforward fonts, but they really have a lot of legibility. They convey information very well. They read well both close up and from a distance, and so there are a lot of considerations why everyone felt that these fonts would work well in this context. To your point about the visibility, we're definitely at the front entrance at Ridge Street. We're looking carefully at what could you do to like pare back some of the existing plantings, maybe pop some of the plantings to emphasize the signage as well, and work everything in together so that it is much easier to see. I can tell you I've overshot the entrance of this park so many times, and it's only a 25-mile speed limit, right? But it is currently hard to see, so we want to make that much more visible, but in keeping with the neighborhood and the character of the property itself. And I would say that just the signage shapes that you're seeing here are a basic shape that we're just working with as we work through this first part of the process, and then we will be looking a little bit more at maybe some tweaks to the shape itself, but we're looking now at like how well does that read in the landscape, and just back from looking at it from coming from the other direction. So just a couple of sample signs. These may not be the actual messages that we are specifically putting on the signs, but just some ideas of how some of the more rural-oriented signs might read, for example. And then just kind of the overall plan. So we started out with this circulation and wayfinding analysis, looking at, okay, so where are the main points that we really need signage to convey all of these, points that people have been talking about. And so one of our very next steps is we'll be asking those who are involved to really go through a draft of this with a fine-tooth comb with us and say things like, oh yeah, we're missing a sign here or there that we really need. And then we've also put together a whole spreadsheet about content. So we put together just some kind of draft, different sizes of signage, and we've done kind of an order of magnitude cost estimate. So far, it looks like with all the signage that's needed in the park, we think it can come in probably around under $10,000 for a comprehensive signage package for the basic signs. That doesn't include a few amenities that we are proposing that we're not sure whether those will happen yet, like some stone columns in certain locations. But just to give you an idea of where we're going with it in terms of financially. And then, so the next steps would be to further develop the signage schedule and the whole manuscript of what needs to be on each side, to refine the sign styles, and to nail down our next steps in terms of schedule. And if there's any phasing to be done, that decision will be made as well. So I will conclude there. I'd be happy to answer any questions, take any comments, further direction.
Just, Denisha, just go over the different types of signs.
Okay.
Direction signs, rule signs. There are several different kinds of signs that we're considering.
Okay, yes. I actually took the meaty slide out because I didn't know if I'd have time to go into that amount of detail, but I'd be happy to. So overall, we would be looking at place signs that are indicators of place, like, for example, the front entry sign, a sign that's right in front of the mansion, a sign that announces where the playground is. Then we would have, there would be directional signs. So in this example, you probably can't read it from where you are, but for example, there are large placemaker signs. So a big sign at the front would be what we're calling a large placemaker sign. There would be a small placemaker sign that would be, for example, near the mansion, be a little bit smaller. The middle the middle example on the bottom row is the park rules sign, and typically most of those would be more pedestrian scale, so you would be reading it more close up. We also have some wayfinding signs for helping with navigation on a pedestrian scale, and then also what we're calling the single idea sign, which might be children at play, for example, or something to that effect.
And the top where they have the optional bump out, that would be the same material as the sign and would just be the logo.
That's the thinking so far, and we're still somewhat in the conceptual stage with materials, although we have priced it out with some materials. So the thinking about that little bump out is it might be where the Town of Rye logo might be, for example.
And the logo, kind of the colors go together nicely, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That gray kind of would support the logo really nicely.
And I have,
The entrance sign be where it is now, or would it say a quarter of a mile Crawford Park?
Good point. So right now, what we're looking at is, it's really hard to see, but on the far right of this image, there's a number 1. So let's see. I think I can, let me do the knuckle thing. Right there, that might be a kind of a forewarning sign, an up and coming, next right Crawford.
Go right by it.
Every time.
Well, Rob, that's an excellent point. We can only do the signage in the park. We would have to talk to the village of Rybrook and possibly the county as to, for example, a sign that may be, say, Crawford Park half a mile or Crawford Park a quarter of a mile from each direction. That would not be, we could make that request, and I think that's a really excellent idea.
How does this work? It goes by you send out the lowest bidder?
Yeah.
Because there's a new sign company that just opened by purchase of Tuesday, where I purchased a sign because I couldn't get one.
No, there are several sign makers. We've had very good luck with one particular one, but something of this, this price, we have to get several bids.
and just to build on what Rob said earlier about the entrance of the park, I think, although it's somewhat obvious, a sign as you begin to enter the park, the first 20 feet or so, just reminding people that there are kids playing, drive with caution, I think would be.
Maybe even a speed bump, which people hate, I know.
We do have speed bumps in the park.
I know.
Yeah.
I hate it. But yeah, it's so low that I sprinkle.
Yeah.
Well, that's something to take note of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They have the new bumps that are on a different, they don't go so high up.
And they're-
slow down.
and they're longer.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're called.
I think they're sometimes called speed humps.
Yeah,
So they're.
pedestrian walkways.
Right. No, I think all of those are good ideas.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much.
Okay,
It's a
thank you,
pleasure to see
Denisha.
all.
Any other questions for Denisha from the board? Okay, thank you, Denisha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have a presentation from Dan Luna? I guess not. Comments from the public on non-agenda items? Do any members of the public wish to speak on Aldo? You might want to wait and speak if I have an idea on the tax cert item that's before us, unless you'd rather speak now.
I'd rather speak now, in general, to try to put it a more positive spin to it, for it. As many of you know, I wrote an article this past week regarding the effect of Emergency Tenants Protection Act on assessments in the village of Westchester, and focusing on the fact that there was a $65,000 refund affecting the Summit apartment building. I see on your agenda tonight Chester Hill is on with a refund, and if I do the math calculations for school and for the village without taking out for any enhanced star that might be applicable or whatever for it, it's about $260,000 worth of refunds affecting Portchester and the school district. And all this because there's only one remaining ETPA apartment in Chester Hill. So what happens under the law is that you're supposed to value the property based upon ETPA rents, not market rents. We all know ETPA rents are at least 30% below where they should be on it. And so my point...
Not where they should be, but below market rent.
Certainly below market rent, okay, for it. And so my point is to just highlight how ridiculous this has become and how impactful it is and how important it is to come up with a solution. And so my choosing to speak at this point is to try to put a positive spin on these bad sorts of things, okay, and try to figure out if there's a way that we can help grow our assessments. Portchester had a discussion item that they wanted your assessor to perhaps talk to them to figure out how with some of the turnover of buildings in downtown Portchester and new sales, how does that help in terms of assessments, and it really doesn't unless you grow your rents for it. So I think it's important that the knowledge of the community increase, that everybody learn a little bit, that we understand what we can do as governments to help grow our assessments, okay, in a fair way to protect people. But certainly the, today's offering, today's special, okay, is the, devastating effect that ETPA is having on our assessments. So I'm using this opportunity just to point out there are a couple of solutions that my article points about. There may be others for it. One is to take a case to trial. I'm special counsel in Eastchester, and we are considering taking a case to trial where there are no ETPA apartments remaining for it. But we'd kind of like to know that we're not the only ones in the fight, okay, that other people are realizing that, wait a second, there's something wrong here. The community passes $90 million worth of bonding bills. Everybody's got to pay something. Everybody's got to pay their fair share. This is not against co-op owners. This is not against renters who might be affected by rent control or ETPA. In Portchester, there's only about 380 units that are still subject to ETPA. Portchester may do something to eliminate ETPA. That doesn't mean people in those apartments have to be faced with increases or anything else. But we have the potential to unlock the values of some of our real estate by eliminating some of the rent controls that, in my opinion, are impacting us in a very, very negative way. So that's the point of my comment tonight. Any questions on my article? I'm willing to stay here, but otherwise, have a good evening.
No, thank you, Aldo. I did read your article, and we are aware of the situation because obviously we have a resolution regarding Chester Hill on, and we are aware of the fact that we do not have the leeway under the current law to do anything else but what we're doing. It is my understanding that there is that this ETPA I wouldn't say exception, but the fact that an ETPA building has this kind of evaluation is due to an appellate decision. And it is also my understanding that there are cases on Long Island that have held otherwise out there. Am I correct?
You're correct.
So there's a conflict between the two appellate divisions, and basically what would have to happen is that the municipality would have to be willing to take a single case all the way up to the Court of Appeals to get a resolution of the two differing appellate division views. And that's a decision actually for the town council to make if they wish to spend the money to do that.
Right. And I would point out, not to play lawyer or anything like that, but it's the same department, Nassau County, and Westchester is the same second department. And the Westchester case basically involved a case in Greenberg where they were using ETPA rents and people were renting their co-op apartments above ETPA rents. And in that case, they said, no, 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 you have to use ETPA rents. So that has now held for the position, not don't use illegal rents, okay, use ETPA rents. Well, I would argue that that probably can get knocked out at the lower level court, okay, when they look at it and say, this is ridiculous, it's not what we
Yeah, but
meant to
the
say.
case, there's a case on Long Island held otherwise.
Correct.
But obviously that was,
Cited, but that, which is helpful to us, so, and it's in the same second
yeah.
department. So-
But
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 somebody's
it's
got
a
to take it to
different,
the mat.
right, somebody has to do it, and, you know, whether it's the town of Rye, I mean, that's something that the council can debate on, because,
Or if somebody, if another community chooses to do it, we'd love to know that you'll pile on and say, go, team, go.
oh, well, I don't think it would have a problem filing an amicus brief. but
That's
to-
right. So-
To start the entire process
Right.
would be.
So highlighting the importance of the issue is important, and that's my reason for
All
doing
right.
it tonight.
Thank you for your
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The next item is a resolution. Jeff, did you want to comment? No? Is a resolution regarding the Columbus Day celebration donation. This is something that we do every year. Right, Hope?
And
Yes,
Hope
we do.
does a wonderful job every year.
Um,
Her fellow committee
This is
members.
for a donation of $1,500 as adopted in the 2018 budget for the Columbus Day Celebration Committee. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson,
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi,
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod,
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter,
Yes.
and Supervisor Zuckerman.
Yes. A resolution awarding a contract for a can we change the title of that, please? Not reassessment monitor, but a monitor for cyclical revaluation. Can I change the title to that, please? Well, I am. A contract for a monitor for cyclical revaluation. Who wants to describe this? Does the town attorney want to talk about this? Or does the chief of staff want to talk about this? I mean, I could talk about it.
I'm
but I
happy
don't
to
feel
talk
like
about it. So, based on the experience that we have learned from of our neighboring communities that have conducted revaluations and also our own experience, it's important not only to have our assessor and her assessment staff paying attention to how this is being handled. And we have also engaged a professional company to conduct the revaluation of our property. But it's also important that there be a monitor that ensures that the quality is absolutely to the standards that we need, and that the public education is of the quality that members of the community understand what is happening with the value of their properties. And as such, we actually split this role into two parts, into a consultant part and a monitor part. So the consultant part, we sent out an RFP. We had a number of professionals who responded, and the person that we engaged, or the firm that we engaged, was McCarthy Consulting. And McCarthy Consulting advised us and handled the writing of our RFP for our reval company, and ensured that we had qualified firms participating in the process and submitting proposals, and then helped us with the selection process and bid analysis. Okay, so that's done, and we have chosen Tyler. And so the next part of this process is to select our monitor. We reissued.
Let me just interrupt you 1 second. We have tentatively we have chosen Tyler, but we have not yet executed a contract because the proposed contract is being reviewed by our legal team. And hopefully, at the next meeting, we will, we'll have signed the contract by then.
That is the plan. So the RFP went out for monitors. We got about 4 or 5 responses. There were some questions that came up as to whether or not we were looking at apples to apples comparisons. We sent out a request for clarity and the opportunity to revise proposals and answer certain questions. We got a number, 2 resubmissions, and the others stayed the same. And at the end of the day, based on our analysis, McCarthy Consulting is still our best choice, and so that's our recommendation.
At a considerably less cost than any of the others. Correct?
Considerably.
Considerably.
And one of the things in going through her qualifications, which are very substantial, it's important to note that her continuing education is in areas where we see a lot of tax certs, commercial properties, valuation of hotels, valuation of restaurants, things that, you know, we can really benefit from to see less tax certs moving forward. Valuation of apartments, condos, and co-ops. And hopefully reduce needs for our local municipalities to reimburse in the future.
Debbie, you had mentioned that education is a part of this. Do we envision, is she going to be making public presentations at meetings to educate the public as to the revaluation
Yes.
process? It'll be a very public
Oh, yes.
thing, because I think that's
Yep.
very, very important for everybody to understand how the process works.
I absolutely agree. I think that Supervisor Zuckerman has had some conversations with certainly the mayors of Portchester and Rybrook about that as well. And it's our expectation that our reval company will participate in that public education process as well. As will, I have to say, the Citizens Task Force on Assessments that has been remarkably productive and engaged in the process.
That is quite accurate. I have in fact spoken to the mayors of Portchester and Rybrook, and this will be a process that will be fully invested through all the communities, and there is no secret. And I use the word cyclical revaluation because that's what it is. This is not a new revaluation that the town is undergoing. This will be the 3rd, and we are required to do this periodically in order to maintain our assessment roll at 100% of value. So that's why it's technically called a cyclical revaluation. Some communities you may have read about have gone through their first revals, and they've actually had some problems, some more than others. But we really don't expect a lot because this will be the 3rd time that the town is doing it. And we're very confident that Tyler has probably done the most revals at least in Westchester and possibly in the state. So they are familiar with the process. I think, did they do Greenberg? I think they did Greenberg, right? They did Greenberg. I know that they've done North Salem. So, okay. So, may I have a motion and a second?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion by anybody? If not, please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson,
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi,
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod,
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter,
Yes.
and Supervisor Zuckerman.
Yes. Our next item is a resolution and an IMA, a resolution approving an IMA, actually, between the town of Rye and the town of Mamaroneck. This has been done periodically between the two towns. There are occasions when the officials of one town or the other have chosen to exercise their rights of filing a grievance of their property values, and the towns have perceived that that would be a conflict of interest for the town BAR to review the assessment of its own town officials. And so we have in the past and continue to have a cooperative intermunicipal agreement between the two towns, whereby the town of Rye, BAR, Board of Assessment Review, will review the grievance of a town of Mamaroneck board member, and vice versa. In this case, we have only one. It is a member of the BAR of the town of Mamaroneck has filed a grievance, and that grievance will be heard by the Board of Assessment Review of the town of Rye. So that's what this resolution is about. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion or questions?
No.
If not, please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson,
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi,
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod,
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter,
Yes.
and Supervisor Zuckerman.
Yes. The next series of resolutions are regarding tax certs, and the first one we've spoken about already. Mr. Vitigliano mentioned it. Resolution regarding the tax cert about the Chester Hill Apartments. Jeff, do you want to say anything about this? I note that Assessor Denise Knauer is not here. She is at an actual, a statewide assessors meeting this week. And Jeff, do you have anything, any comment? May I have a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion.
Second, please.
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion?
I just had a general question about the reval and how it relates to ETP properties. Are properties that do have ETP units in them that are not noted on our tax rolls, is it likely that they'll come to light and we'll be able to prevent or mitigate any future? Or is that not the goal of the reval?
The goal of the reval is to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are buildings that have noticeably elevated assessments and have ETPA units in them, you know, we'll look at that and hopefully tweak them down so that we can forestall tax cert cases.
Okay. I mean, that would be obviously a goal because every time we do have the tax cert, it impacts the village, it impacts the school district, most importantly. So that's something maybe in the future, or as we go through the process, we
Sure,
can start.
of course. And the point that you're making, the larger point that you're making is, you know, where we feel presently where we might have the assessment too high,
Mm-hmm.
where we can anticipate reducing the assessment in the upcoming years to shorten or truncate or not, you know, to
Yeah.
forestall a case, we're doing that.
Yeah. See, and that's another key
Yeah,
initiative that our council's taken on.
Yeah, one of the things that we're doing is we're pushing settlements and or trials in all the cases that are before us. We just had our quarterly meeting with the Village of Portchester, the Village of Rybrook, Portchester School District, and the Blindbrook School District, going over all of the outstanding cases that are in court and advising them also of the new cases that have been filed at the Board of Assessment Review. And in fact, the number of filed cases this year is down. I think there are 100 fewer commercial cases. I'm not sure of the number, but if it's just commercial or overall. But there were fewer cases filed this year than were filed last year. Some have already been settled, and we're pushing all of them. You know, that's a situation that we don't like existing, and we're as Jeff said, we're trying to get the values right. Jeff, you had something?
Yeah, I just want to kind of put this in perspective with, ETPA. The number of units that are in Portchester, which is really where the bulk of the units are spread out among, call it 25 buildings. And some of those buildings are large. So buildings like the Windsor Apartments, Chester Hill, Regent Gardens, the Summit, these are buildings that are substantial. So the point that Mr. Vitigliano was raising is a fair one, and the quirk in the law is, and sort of approaching, correcting this quirk in the law, can be done perhaps by a lawsuit, perhaps legislatively, because this issue developed because there's a interplay between the statute, under the Real Property Tax Law, and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, another state law, and you had a court interpret what happens when the two collide, and this court in that case, Westchester. Westchester Tenants Corp. That he was citing was just that. It was a court, and interpreting how to protect the tenants who are under ETPA from feeling the effect of an elevated assessment. So they were looking at it from the point of view, well, it's not fair if the municipality raises the assessment on a building when you have units in there that need to be regulated, and the expenses of those units need to be sort of restrained to maintain affordable housing.
Part of the problem is that you're dealing with co-ops there, and co-ops are shares, unlike condominiums where you have an ownership. And I think they can be treated differently. Am I correct, Jeff?
Well, the tax law, this is getting a little arcane, but the tax law 581, which is the relevant section, that if you want this issue to go away legislatively, you'd have to amend this section of the tax law. And Section 581 prohibits the assessing of a co-op apartment at any value different from that if it were not cooperatively owned. Okay, so if there's one ETPA unit in the building, then you have to kind of spread that up.
Yeah, but you're dealing in co-ops.
That's for co-ops.
Right, that's for co-ops. That's not for condos.
For co-ops.
For co-ops, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is that co-ops are a unique feature that probably exists almost nowhere else but New York State, and almost nowhere else in New York State other than New York City and Westchester. So that is a unique animal that that we're getting hit with, and I believe that, for example, in the village of Rybrook, if you need a zoning change to build a multifamily dwelling, not even a multifamily dwelling, for example, even something up at Rexon, the village, I believe, will insist on fee ownership as a form of ownership that would prevent that situation from pertaining. And last year, we passed a law that states that if you're converting from a home ownership form of home ownership to a co-op, the property would be treated the same as it was, to prevent people from converting to take advantage of certain tax provisions. And I know from my meetings with other supervisors on a monthly basis that many of the towns are considering such legislation to prevent the I can't say unfair, to prevent the different treatment. People trying to scam the law, in other words. So something that the towns are all aware of, that we're trying to take action about, and you know, the point that Aldo raises is a good point, and one of the questions is how much does it really cost us in these circumstances in terms of payback? And I think when we do a revaluation, and since this situation has come to the fore, I think when the buildings are revalued, the reval company can take into account the fact that there are in fact ETPA units, and so that would prevent successful tax certs in the future.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
Because I think, the overall goal for us is to reduce the amount of tax certs, and I think, granted that they're down by 100 claims this year is a great start, and I look forward to the progress that's going to be made through the reval, and hopefully we can reduce that number even further.
On this issue with regard to bringing a
Yeah.
lawsuit or trying a case, something like Chester Hill, I mean, every case is different, and every case we have to weigh the costs and benefits to trying a case. It's a cost of the town, it's a cost of the school district, it's a cost of the villages. I would suggest, because we're not flooded with ETPA buildings, we're not, a more densely urban, apartment-oriented community like Yonkers or New Rochelle or something like that, I would say certainly support a lawsuit that takes place in another jurisdiction with some sort of, friend of the court brief if we think that's helpful. But we have great relationships with legislators, so
Yeah.
I would say try to change the law.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the problems with that is that if you start to look for a legislative solution, you're dealing with lobbyists, and then you're dealing with the entire, tenant ETPA lobby, which is a powerful lobby. It's tenants, and
Well-
then you face that situation. That's just a practicality.
And I think from the council's perspective, I mean, when you go into litigation, you have to just, from a budgeting standpoint, just assume that, you're going to have to pay the full amount plus your legal fees. That's a big risk to take because that's worst case scenario, but it's also a possibility.
Do we know why there were so many fewer claims this year? You said 100 less than last year?
Yeah, I think that's just on the commercial.
I mean, is there any explanation for that?
I would like to think that over time that we've adjusted some of the values. I just got those numbers yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to really analyze exactly what it was that caused it. Most of the claims were actually in Portchester. There are actually only 2 new commercial petitions filed in the Blind Brook School District, and I think that both of those will be resolved very shortly.
That's at the bar, not
At the Board of Assessment Review, those are the new those are the new filings. Those are the new filings.
They begin at the bar, the board
Yeah.
of assessment.
And
Okay.
then
They make their way to
and there were several more that were filed in Rybrook in the Portchester School District, but not a great number. I'm thinking that we're at probably 10 or 12. So the numbers are looking very good, and of course the villages and the school districts have basically been apprised of that.
Jeff, is there a time frame in which a commercial property needs to file a cert? In other words, this goes back to 2011 is the first year. Is there a time frame in which they have to file or start the process
They have to
that
file
prohibits
every
them
year.
from going back
Because the next
however
cert,
many
No,
years?
no.
No, that's why I'm asking.
because the next cert goes back to 2010, all
Right.
the way up to 2017.
Jeff will explain it.
So under the law, there's a 4-year time frame
I
that
don't
you,
think he's asking that. You have to file every year.
right, you, okay,
Okay.
so you have to file every
We're talking
year.
about the Board of Assessment. You must
From the
file
bo-
a
okay.
petition every year with the Board of Assessment review. If you don't file the petition in June of every year, you lose that completely. And so people, even if they don't have a good claim, they'll file the petition to preserve their rights. And then, Jeff,
And then when they file in court, when they bring a tax cert matter, a petition in court, they will bring those every year and let them accumulate. And they don't have to file what's known as a note of issue, which is a note saying I'm ready for trial, until 4 years elapse. If they go beyond 4 years, then the case will be deemed, that year will be deemed abandoned. So what petitioners counsel often do, because these cases start to accumulate and they're accumulating potential refunds, and petitioners counsel, won't file a note of issue until, say, 4 years have elapsed on the first year that they filed, and then the next year will come and they'll file a note of issue on the next year, and so to preserve
So
those
that's
years,
why it can go back 6 or 8 years.
right. So we're trying very hard to settle cases earlier than we've ever done, not let them accumulate, not wait for notes of issue to be filed. Certainly attack the cases that have the most years at issue. That's our first priority. And then we work backwards. And we focus on the buildings that really have the largest assessed value, because those result in the largest refunds. Small properties that have a couple of years at issue, that's sort of back burner stuff. Bigger properties that we see coming down the pipe, we'll look at pretty carefully if it's a couple of years at issue, and try to see if we can resolve it with a phone call with minimum litigation expense.
Yeah.
So that's really how we're, the new, it's not a new approach, but it's a more, I would say,
it's an
concerted
approach that I've,
Yeah.
It's
that I've
Gary's
taken.
initiative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that hasn't really been done before, is to make sure, that we're on top of each of these cases, why they're assessed the way they're assessed, and is there wiggle room? We have one major case, I'm not going to name names right now, one major case that I've directed an appraisal to be done on, and we're going to go to trial, because we think, based on our internal analysis, and it'll be confirmed with an appraisal, that the property is actually underassessed, and they're seeking major refunds. And I said, nope, they'll either withdraw or we're gonna take it to trial, and we'll see when the appraisal comes in. It'll be a couple of months, but we're taking it.
Just very briefly, from the board's point of view, I think you've all read the stories in the local papers over the last 6 months or so based on the cases that we've settled. Controversial cases,
Yeah.
big cases. And some of the complaints have been complaints of process, complaints of information flow. And so Gary's instructed us to meet quarterly with all of the stakeholders in these cases, the school districts, the villages, the village managers, providing information on a quarterly, regular basis. So we have these meetings, these working groups, or these briefing meetings that, the town, that the villages come to and the school district comes to, and we try to show them everything that's coming down the pipe. And we're getting better at it, we're getting more organized with it, and we take everyone's suggestion. And if anyone wants to come and sit in, you're more than welcome.
I may, just out of
It's fun.
pure curiosity, but I know that that was an issue and that you guys were very attentive to the concerns of the other stakeholders in it, so I thank you both for that.
Another initiative we're doing, and I actually spoke to our assemblyman last year about it, and continuing with that and with our state senator is, Jeff mentioned the 4-year process for the note of issue. Well, I think that should be reduced to 2 legislatively. And there are lobbies obviously against it, but it's something that we can work on, and it's my legislative request for the next session.
No, and I,
Use it. Sure you can. We're just sitting here talking.
it's a fascinating topic, isn't it?
You may have written about this, I think.
Rick Buse and Rybrook. Yeah, 5 articles in Westmore News, not meant to tweak anybody in particular. Mr. Binder actually hit the nail on the head. It's about process. The concept that Mr. Vitigliano spoke about legal maneuvers in order to help the taxpayers, is one way of doing it. What I've been disappointed in personally is the lack of efforts by our elected officials, be it the town of Rye, be it the village of Rybrook, be it the village of Portchester. I've gotten a lot of nods and winks. A lot of them have made the argument that Supervisor Zuckerman made, which is a legitimate, logical argument, that there are lobbies out there. An argument that obviously I made in my articles also. But nothing will get done unless somebody makes noise. And in that respect, I'm disappointed that the 5 groups that are most affected by this, our elected officials, have not gone and said to our state assemblyman, our state senator, you have to change the law. Mr. Binder can only do so much as an attorney. My brother's an attorney, my sister's an attorney, my brother-in-law's an attorney, and my son's an attorney. All attorneys can only do so much. But if you change the legislation, it's done like that. I don't see where our local elected officials are getting out there and saying look, we have a situation with a state senator who has just recently been elected, is up for re-election in November, may run unopposed, I don't know, but is doing a very good job going through the community and listening. However, I've not heard, and I follow these things, anybody in any of the communities talk about how important and how unfair the commercial cert process is to the average taxpayer. The cert process is not fair. We can go every year to the bar and hope we get our 1 year. Mr. Baxter talked about that look-back period. That look-back period benefits nobody. 9 years I was on the Blindbrook Board of Education, 2 years as a trustee in the village, and guess what? The Blindbrook Board is constrained to a 2% undesignated fund balance. They get hit with a $4.7 million cert with $1.6 million in interest that they're going to pay over 20 years. How is that fair? The state tells you, you only have 2%. Now, how are you going to wind up paying $4.7 million? Nobody has that. Village of Rybrook, they have a line, $5,000. They are constrained by law. They can't put money aside to pay. So what do? They have to go out and bond it. Come on, guys. This isn't fair to the taxpayers of this community. By the way, I'm not making an argument here that the commercial owners don't have the right to do what they do. They have every right to do it. But as Supervisor Zuckerman said, I'll give you 2 years. But why as a homeowner do I get 1? I'll give you 2. Maybe the paperwork takes a little while. But I can honestly tell you that in those certs that we talked about with Doral Rex and Rybrook, if it was 2 years, maybe the village of Rybrook could have taken it out of their regular undesignated fund balance and wouldn't have to bond and wouldn't have the taxpayers of the village of Rybrook have to wind up paying that interest on something like that. The same thing for the school district. frankly, I am absolutely appalled at the fact that people don't get it. You're paying for this. I made this argument about the school district. The school district is going to be paying back $320,000 for the next 20 years, every year. Mr. Baxter knows this. That's 3 teachers and their benefits. Come on. Who are we hurting here? We're hurting the kids of the school district. I suggested that, you know, when the village has to pay back $180,000 each year for their bond because of the certs, maybe Mr. Zuckerman's pothole in front of his house won't get filled next year by the village. I think it probably will be, but that's not the point. The point is, if it's not him, it could be me, it could be anybody else who lives in the village. My point I'm making here is I'm trying to get the elected officials in these villages, and by the way, this goes on throughout the state of New York. I mean, somebody's got to say, hey, look, let's at least level the playing field for everybody. We'll give the commercial property owners an extra year. I spoke to Assemblyman Otis. He talked about maybe getting it from 4 years to 3 years. That's great, but meanwhile, I see all the stipulations that we have here are going back 6 or 7 years. The process is broken. It's not the people. And by the way, it would make your jobs a whole lot easier if you didn't have to deal with these all the time. And as I pointed out, the budget, your extra legal costs from last year were a lot. I get it. I understand why. I don't question the reasoning for it. I question the process that causes you to have to do that, and all the other municipalities. So I want you guys to lead. I want you guys to say, you know what, we're going to let our state officials know that this is really unfair and that we're bearing the brunt of it, either by having to talk about it for however long you talk about it, or by having to go to court to defend these things from 2010 to 2012.
Rick, let me interrupt you. First of all, with all due respect, you are not aware of the conversations that I have had with our elected officials on every level, okay? You are not aware of them. But I assure you, I am well aware of this situation. And it's one of my initiatives to try to get that law changed as well. Meanwhile, in dealing with the backlog of cases, you do note that they go back to 2010, 2011, long before I became the supervisor. We are pushing forward to settle a great many cases. Unfortunately, the 2 cases in the Blindbrook School District, Village of Rybrook, that you and others have alluded to, those went back many years, and for whatever reason, they weren't settled. Okay? We settled them on actually good terms. As bad as they were, they could have been settled on worse terms had we gone to trial. We know what we're doing with these. We know what the numbers are. We know what the appraisals show. And we're working on all of these cases. We have lists of cases that we're working on. We have spoken about them. I've given direction to the town attorney and the cert attorney to close these cases out or to go to trial on all of them. We are moving on all of these.
Mr. Supervisor, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. And by the way, for you to speak to everybody is fine. I would like your whole board to say, we believe there should be a change in state law. It's very nice that you're going out, I'm assuming representing the board. I don't know if you are when you speak to them. You are the supervisor, but you don't represent the board. There's a simple way to do it. Put in writing a resolution to our state officials that says the board of the town of Rye believes that the process is flawed, which you have said tonight, and that we are calling on you to make the changes that are necessary so that the taxpayers in the town of Rye are taken care of and watched out for and are not subject to an unfair process. I go back to the process, Mr. Supervisor. I don't go back to the people. I'm not going back to you. I'm going back to the process. The process is wrong. It's flawed. And all I'm asking is that you, as well as these other boards, go ahead and do something about it. And all it has to be is a resolution that says, we believe as a board that the process is flawed and we're calling on you to take action. I'll be a happy camper if that's what I get out of it. I don't need anything else. It's just such an incredibly difficult thing to get through because, as we all know, it's a very dry subject. It's a dry
Well,
subject.
actually, I find it very interesting.
Well, obviously, I have if I spent all that time with it. By the same token, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything. And your
I never
lobbying
said we can't.
notwithstanding. You
I
did,
never.
But you did take it that it was a
I-
personal situation. This is not a personal.
What?
This is a process situation. I have to tell that to people 100 times, whether it's you, whether it's school board members, whether it's village mayors that I speak with. Everybody seems to think that, in particular, I'm taking out after them, and they don't get it. It's very simple. And by the way, I wrote
Rick, I get it. I really do get it.
then that's good.
I really do
so
get it.
now what I'm doing respectfully is asking for the town board to draft a resolution, and I've made this offer to the Blindbrook School Board. I'll write it for you, and you can edit it and do whatever you want with it, but a resolution to our local state officials and say, hey, it's time for you guys to step up and change the law. It may go nowhere. I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't lobbyists out there from the commercial real estate interests and the trial lawyers. I get it.
I understand.
Doesn't mean it shouldn't
I-
be tried.
I understand what-
I know you do. And I appreciate
really
that.
do understand it, and we'll take that under advisement.
I appreciate
Certainly
that.
will.
And I thank you for allowing me
Okay.
to speak. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So we have a motion and a second on this one.
Did we?
We do.
We did. Okay. Please call the roll.
I just have one quick question, and I'm sorry. I'm looking at the years that it was reduced from, and it's 11, 12, 13, 14, and it seems like 15 and 16.
They didn't file.
Okay.
They can't, now.
And they
being that
can't
we just- They
retroactively.
can't go back to 15 and 16 now that we're going to 17. They didn't, but they still could file.
No.
No.
Still within
No.
that
No.
year.
They
Within
missed
that
it.
year, they have to do that.
Okay. So no.
Right, Jeff? Listen.
Right.
Missed it.
If you don't file, or as they say in the vernacular, if you snooze, you lose.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
That's the
Please
term
call
I
the
use.
roll. Hope.
Councilperson Jackson.
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi.
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod.
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter.
Yes.
And Supervisor Zuckerman.
Yes. And just one more note. We have several of these, but every one of these resolutions, every one of these settlements has been discussed at our quarterly meetings. The school boards and the villages both know all about these. These are not secrets.
I really need to underline that, because it's not just those meetings, it's counsel for the town, communicating with counsel for the school district, if there is one, communicating with the business manager of the school district, communicating with the stakeholders and their leadership. So there have been times where either Dan Tartaglia or myself has had to go and make a presentation before the school board.
Yeah.
Not recently, but there is communication flow so that we can avoid using the word sandbagging ever again.
And I know that has been a much broader sort of behind the scenes discussion that you and Gary have worked very hard on, and I know that you guys have inherited quite a few cases, and you have really been working to reduce that and lower that number and make sure that we get it done in a timely manner as much as possible. So thank you too for that initiative.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate it. The next resolution is the Blindbrook Club.
So the Blindbrook Club is a golf course in the village of Rybrook. This particular settlement is a terrific one for the village of Rybrook, because actually we've negotiated that the petitioner waive any refunds as would be due and owing from the village of Rybrook back to the petitioner. So obviously the village of Rybrook and its leadership is very happy with that. In addition, the school district, through its council, negotiated a reduced refund that their board is going to act on, I think, tomorrow, or they may have already done that. So that refund is at a much reduced rate. So this is a win.
Thank you, Jeff. Motion and a second, please.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson?
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi?
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod?
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter?
Yes.
And Supervisor Zuckerman?
Yes. The next one is Home Depot. And Debbie, or Hope, I should say, Cerciorara is misspelled in the resolution. Not in the resolution, in the title. There's an R missing. So correct that on the agenda, please, when you can. Would you like to talk about Home Depot?
I don't want to say too much about this particular case in the terms of the settlement, but I'll be happy to do that in executive session. Remember, these are cases that are still in litigation. But suffice it to say, I recommend the board approve this settlement.
Does anybody wish to have an executive session on this, or is this sufficient?
No, this is good. I'm okay with it.
Okay. Motion and a second, please.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson?
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi?
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod?
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter?
Yes.
And Supervisor Zuckerman?
Yes. 1017 and 1019 Grove Street in Mamaroneck. Jeff, this might require...
I have an explanation. I have an explanation for this in case anybody wants it. Is there a call for that explanation?
That would be.
I mean, it's in the explanation's listed. The explanation.
Yeah, it's in the attached paperwork.
Okay. They have a motion and a second.
Make the motion.
Second, please.
I'll second.
Please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson?
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi?
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod?
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter?
Yes.
And Supervisor Zuckerman?
Yes. Our last resolution is for select auctions, to conduct an auction for in-rem foreclosure properties. I am advised that this has been done in the past. We're about to go to auction on several properties, and we are hiring an auction firm. This is the same firm that we used before, Hope? Yes. And it's the same resolution that the prior administration used? Yes. Right? Okay.
I called them and
They're still in business and still auctioning. Okay, yes, I remember because we auctioned properties year before last and got very good prices. Motion and a second, please.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Please call the roll.
Councilperson Jackson?
Yes.
Councilperson Nardi?
Yes.
Councilperson Axelrod?
Yes.
Councilperson Baxter?
Yes.
And Supervisor Zuckerman?
Yes. Nick Mecca is not here tonight. He has submitted his report. The town clerk has submitted her report. The highway report is submitted. Does anybody have any questions on any of those reports? If not,
Does
If
Dave
not-
have- Does Dave have anything?
hold it. I was just going to get to Dave. Dave, do you have a report?
The report was submitted as well. It's just the receivable report, the interim report. So I'll just talk about it briefly. I just added some narrative this month and going forward. It'll be submitted to the board on the in-rem receivables, the tax receivables and the in-rem receivables. From what I understand, Jeff is back at the helm.
So excited.
For the in-rem receivables. So, the class of 17, as of July 31st every year, we have in-rem properties become in-rem. They've been in lien for 2 years, they become in-rem, so they have 3 years of outstanding receivables, and that becomes the in-rem class. So as of July 31st of 18, there'll be about 30 new additional in-rem. But out of last year's class, we had about 26, and only 8 have paid through June 30th of this year, which is substantially less than the previous years at that same time. So we got about $1.5 million from the class of 17. So basically, they went to summer school, and now Jeff is going to be tutoring them. So either they pay up and pay the back taxes, interest, and penalties, which brings in revenue and cash flow to the town, or the town takes possession and then sells those properties based on the assessed value and some percentage of assessed value. So we really need to keep working on that, because that puts pressure on our cash flow. And if they don't come in, then we do have the possibility of going out and borrowing for a tax anticipation note in October, November. So we're trying to avoid that.
Yes, we will. We will get the money.
Could I just ask,
Yes.
will maybe come back in 3 months and give another update?
Yes.
In terms of, I know she does this first 6 months, but I think,
she's going to be on a quarterly schedule.
all right,
So
good,
it's
good.
June 30th, September 30th, and right.
Okay, just to keep track of it, that's good.
Right.
That's it.
That's it.
You're all set?
I'm all set.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll
All
second
in
it.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.